In the turbulent times when the Roman Republic teetered on the brink, seemingly striving to avoid inevitable disappearance from the political map, a remarkable figure emerged onto the historical stage, destined to alter the course of events: Publius Cornelius Scipio. This man, who delivered Rome from its greatest threat and paid an exorbitant price for his greatness, left an indelible mark on history. He earned the epithet Africanus not by birthright, but through his triumphant victories on African soil. It was he who managed to crush Hannibal Barca, the brilliant Carthaginian general, who had for many years humiliated Rome and terrorized the entire Italian peninsula. Scipio triumphed over his adversary not only in open battle. He surpassed Hannibal in cunning, patience, and strategic thinking, demonstrating exceptional abilities as a commander and diplomat. However, Scipio's triumph did not come without bitter consequences. In Rome at that time, no man could bask in the glory for too long without inciting envy and animosity from influential political factions. The Senate, consumed by jealousy of his immense popularity and fearing his growing influence, transformed his well-deserved honor into a matter of suspicion, and gratitude for past services into betrayal and intrigue. This narrative is not merely the biography of an invincible general. It is a tale of a young aristocrat who defied fate, restored his people's lost pride, and rekindled hope at a moment when all seemed lost. A story of triumph and tragedy, greatness and downfall. History records numerous instances of tragic injustice, where triumph led to bitter exile. One such example is the fate of the man whose name is forever linked with the salvation of Rome, but whose glory ultimately proved unbearable for the Republic itself. We speak of the brilliant general Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, whose life, full of ascents and descents, became a reflection of the state's inability to value and support its heroes. On an August day in 216 BC, the Roman Republic stood on the precipice of destruction. On the plain near Cannae, in southern Italy, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca demonstrated his genius, executing a maneuver that would later enter the annals of military history as one of the most outstanding. With fewer forces, he managed to encircle the Roman army and inflict a merciless slaughter upon it. More than 50,000 Roman legionaries fell on the battlefield. This crushing defeat plunged Rome into a state of profound paralysis. The wound inflicted by Cannae was so painful that many Romans lost hope and predicted the Republic's inevitable collapse. Yet, it was in this dark hour, amidst universal fear, confusion, and despair, that a man appeared on the political stage who was destined to play a decisive role in Rome's fate. This man was Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was barely 20 years old, held no high position, and had no formal command, but he possessed a rare gift that the demoralized survivors so desperately lacked: the gift of leadership. When a group of soldiers, stunned by the scale of the disaster, began discussing the possibility of capitulation and abandoning further struggle, Scipio, moved by indignation, burst into their assembly. With a drawn sword in hand, he swore by the gods never to permit the shameful surrender of Rome. This moment became a turning point in history, marking the beginning of Scipio's ascent and the rekindling of hope in the hearts of the Romans. Before the gods, "I swear by Jupiter the Thunderer, I shall never betray the eternal city of Rome, and with this very sword, I shall punish anyone who dares to infringe upon its greatness." This audacious outburst was not merely an empty threat, but rather a declaration of his self-awareness, a manifesto of belonging to the great Roman civilization. It was a spark of hope, ignited in the utter darkness that enveloped Rome. And though he was but a youth, it was in this moment that the future general was born. Thus, legends are forged. True leaders are not cultivated in sheltered environments, but tempered in the crucible of harsh trials. While Rome desperately resisted the Carthaginian onslaught, far from the Apennine Peninsula, in the disputed territories of Iberia, a battle of no less significance unfolded. There, Roman legions, led by Publius Cornelius Scipio's father and uncle, for many long months wore down the Carthaginian war machine, striving to sever supply lines and protect their remaining allies. But fate decreed otherwise, turning to tragedy. The Scipio brothers fell victim to the treachery of local Celtiberians, allies they had trusted implicitly, and died bravely in an unequal battle against Carthaginian forces led by Hasdrubal Barca. This defeat was a devastating blow for Rome. Catastrophe struck Rome, bringing with it a crushing defeat. For Publius, the news was a true blow of fate. He lost not only his father and uncle on one tragic day, but also the hope of a future inheritance he had not yet received. The city was in a state of stupor, paralyzed by the horror of what had happened. No one showed any desire to lead this ill-fated campaign, as if a curse hung over it. The senators were indecisive, and battle-hardened veterans remained grimly silent. It was tantamount to suicide. And then, like a ray of hope, Scipio, barely 25 years old, appeared in the Senate chamber. He presented himself not as an arrogant youth, but as a man aware of the gravity of the moment and his high purpose. Lacking experience in commanding large formations, he requested to be entrusted with the remnants of the Roman forces in Spain. Amidst the general silence and absence of anyone willing to take responsibility, the Senate, having no other option, was forced to agree. Scipio departed for Spain as proconsul, leading a small and demoralized army. He had no grand victories, no fame, no generous promises. Only an unyielding will to avenge his family's death, restore Rome's tarnished honor, and halt Carthage's victorious march. He understood that he could only rely on himself. But he also knew that, should he succeed, not just a military victory awaited him, but a triumph that would herald a new era of greatness for Rome. On the horizon, the dawn of a new era for Rome glimmered. New Carthage, which appeared on the map, was not merely another settlement. It was a true jewel in Carthage's Spanish dominions, serving as a key naval and military base, an administrative center, an arsenal, a repository of riches, and, of course, a symbol of power. Its capture meant inflicting a devastating blow not only tactically, but also psychologically, undermining the enemy's morale. However, the plan to storm such an impregnable fortress with an army still in its formation stage seemed an adventure bordering on madness. But Scipio viewed the situation from a different perspective. His plans did not include waging a protracted war or engaging in frontal clashes with the three scattered Carthaginian armies operating in the region. His brilliant mind calculated several steps ahead. The strategy involved striking where the enemy least expected it, acting swiftly and with pinpoint precision. Thanks to secret intelligence obtained from the sailors of the allied city of Tarraco, Scipio discovered a vulnerability in the city's defenses, which was surrounded by sea on three sides. A lake to the north, which at low tide exposed a direct path to the walls. This was an opportunity demanding impeccable coordination and precise timing. On that fateful day, as the defenders of New Carthage were fully engrossed in repelling the furious assault from land and sea, Scipio gave the order for a select detachment of warriors to undertake a daring sortie. The calculation was based on perfect synchronization with natural rhythms. At low tide, when the water receded, exposing the muddy bottom, the Roman legionaries were to cross the lake. Stealthily advancing across the treacherous ground, they managed to scale the city's inner fortifications from its least protected flank. What seemed unthinkable, incredible, was accomplished in a matter of hours. New Carthage fell under the onslaught of the Roman army. It was a triumph, complete and unconditional. Scipio not only captured the city, he seized a vast arsenal, an impressive naval fleet, untold treasures, and, most valuable of all, Carthage's secret archives. This victory not only solidified his authority and boosted the morale of the Roman troops, but also secured strategic superiority in the region. Moreover, Scipio proved to the world that to achieve great goals, Rome no longer required countless human resources or endless time. It needed only a visionary leader, capable of seeing beyond the horizon, a man possessing strategic thinking and an unwavering will to win. Carthage felt a crushing blow. For the first time since the beginning of the bloody war, fear and uncertainty crept into the hearts of the Carthaginians, shifting to the other side. After the brilliant conquest of New Carthage, Scipio did not succumb to the temptation to rest on his laurels and revel in glory. He understood perfectly well that three powerful Carthaginian armies, led by the formidable Barca brothers, Hasdrubal, Mado, and Hasdrubal Gisco, were still active on the Iberian Peninsula, ready to avenge the defeat. Together, Hasdrubal Gisco and his allies represented a formidable force capable of crushing Roman might. However, individually, their armies became vulnerable targets. Scipio's path was not through a grueling war of attrition, but through a series of swift and precise strikes aimed at the most sensitive points of Carthaginian defense. The Roman general's strategic objective was to prevent the three enemy armies from uniting. He intended to separate them, deprive them of the ability to cooperate, and then systematically destroy each one. While Hasdrubal Barca hastily left Spanish lands to transfer reinforcements to his brother Hannibal, who was waging war in Italy, Scipio focused his attention on the remaining two commanders. But before the main events unfolded, a scene occurred that struck contemporaries with its tragedy. Roman legions intercepted Hasdrubal Barca's army as it moved north, and inflicted a crushing defeat upon it in the Battle of the Metaurus River. The Carthaginian general's head, bloodied and devoid of its former glory, was sent to Hannibal's camp. This brutal act was an unambiguous signal. Rome no longer feared the Barca family. Now, the Romans themselves hunted the Carthaginians. Meanwhile, Scipio continued his victorious advance in Spain. In the large-scale Battle of Becula, he thwarted Carthaginian plans to regroup forces and restore combat readiness. And when, finally, Mago and Hasdrubal Gisco decided to unite their armies, it was already too late. Scipio met them on the plain of Ilipa, near modern Seville. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, the Roman army was better prepared and possessed a clearly developed plan, which predetermined the outcome of the battle. Scipio, armed with a flawless plan, positioned his allied troops in the very center of his army, while his battle-hardened legionaries were placed on the flanks, a stark departure from his usual tactics employed in previous battles. When the battle erupted, the Carthaginians, blinded by overconfidence, charged at the seemingly weak center of the Roman army. However, while they were bogged down in fierce fighting, Scipio executed a swift maneuver, attacking the enemy's flanks. His forces encircled the foe, delivering a crushing blow that completely disrupted their battle formations. Panic spread through the Carthaginian ranks, and local allies, losing faith in victory, began defecting en masse to the Romans. By the end of the day, the Carthaginian army in Spain was virtually annihilated. This victory was not just another triumph. It marked the culmination of a military campaign planned with cold, strategic precision worthy of the greatest generals in history. Scipio did not merely conquer Spain. He sealed the fate of the Carthaginian Empire. In Rome, people began to realize that a commander unparalleled in a generation had emerged among them. Scipio returned to Rome as a triumphator, a national hero. He had crushed the Barcid dynasty in Spain, destroyed their supply system, and deprived Carthage of its most valuable European possession. For many Romans, his figure became the embodiment of a savior, a symbol of hope and Rome's greatness. Ascending to the political Olympus, Scipio Africanus appeared before the Roman people in the aura of a savior, having delivered them from the horrors of war. However, in Roman political circles, triumphant recognition often coexists with a shadow of suspicion and hidden motives. Despite the honors bestowed, the Senate greeted his triumph with restraint, which clearly did not match the scale of his achievements. Contrary to established age limits, Scipio was awarded the title of consul, but it was his magnetic charm, the love of the people, and almost divine veneration that sowed apprehension in the hearts of ardent republicans. They saw Scipio not merely as a triumphator, but as a potential despot, ready to trample the foundations of Roman liberty. Among these vigilant guardians of the republican order, Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder, particularly stood out. Cato harbored deep distrust towards Scipio's refined lifestyle, his adherence to foreign cultures, and above all, his rapidly growing political influence. For Cato, asceticism, strict discipline, and loyalty to ancestral Roman traditions were immutable values. Scipio, with his fascination for Greek philosophy, lavish spectacles, and charismatic leadership style, represented a direct threat to these ideals. The confrontation between the two outstanding personalities reached its climax when a scandal erupted, involving Scipio's inner circle. At the zenith of Scipio Africanus's glory, when the triumph of his victories echoed throughout Rome like thunderclaps, Cato the Elder, the tireless guardian of Roman traditions, perceived in his greatness a threat to the Republic. Losing no time, he unleashed a barrage of criticism upon the celebrated general, accusing his entourage of corruption and excessive luxury, which, in Cato's view, undermined the moral foundations of the state. Cato's attempt to remove Scipio from office was unsuccessful. The people's love and recognition of the great warrior's merits proved an insurmountable obstacle to political intrigues. However, Rome had already embarked on a path of change, irreversibly transforming under the influence of historical events. The Second Punic War, while leaving deep wounds in Roman soil, simultaneously awakened dormant ambitions. Power gradually slipped from the Senate's grasp, transferring to generals whose laurels were stained with the blood of victories. Cato, a staunch Republican, could not allow such a development and was prepared to fight for the preservation of the old order until his last breath. While the people of Rome hailed Scipio as a savior capable of leading the state out of crisis, plots and intrigues brewed in the shadows, preparing the ground for his future downfall. For in the political life of the Republic, military merits are quickly forgotten, but personal scores and enmity endure. Roman strategists understood that to finally defeat Carthage, it was not enough to expel its forces from the Iberian Peninsula. It was necessary to strike at the very heart of the enemy, depriving it of the ability to resurge. Scipio, more than anyone, recognized this necessity. He proposed a daring, seemingly unthinkable plan to transfer the war to the African continent, into the very lair of the enemy. The Senate hesitated, not doubting the genius of the plan, but astonished by its boldness and scale. Scipio proposed more than just an invasion of Africa. He sought to compel Hannibal himself, the legendary general who had terrorized Italy for many years, to return home to defend it from Roman invasion. It was a risky but brilliant strategic move, capable of forever changing the course of the war. However, this was truly an outstanding strategic concept. Making Sicily his base, Scipio meticulously prepared his army for the impending trials. This was not just another military enterprise, but the culmination of a multi-year confrontation, a decisive battle for dominance in the Mediterranean region. After a triumphant landing on the African continent, his battle-hardened legions effortlessly crushed Carthaginian advance units, striking terror into the hearts of Carthage's inhabitants. And then, what was destined came to pass. Hannibal, the greatest general, was ordered to return home. Two legendary figures of military history were to clash. One, the unyielding defender of Carthage; the other, the audacious conqueror of Spanish lands. Both understood that their impending encounter would be the defining moment in the fate of their peoples. The Battle of Zama, which entered the annals of history, erupted on October 19, 202 BC, at the very walls of Carthage. Hannibal arrived on the battlefield, holding what he believed to be his last trump card, an impressive army, bolstered by the terrifying might of 80 war elephants. But Scipio, the celebrated commander, did not falter in the face of danger. He understood perfectly well that the key to victory lay not in brute force, but in the ability to control the situation. Displaying unyielding will and iron discipline, he ordered his troops to form corridors in their battle lines to allow the elephants to pass through. The enormous animals, disoriented by the gleaming armor of the Roman legionaries and the ominous silence of the closed ranks, surged into the created passages without inflicting significant damage. Trapped, they were surrounded and ruthlessly destroyed, depriving the Carthaginian army of its main advantage. But it met a sad fate. Then a meticulously executed military operation unfolded, where every maneuver was perfectly calculated. Scipio, like a diligent student, had thoroughly studied Hannibal's tactics, and this deep understanding became his main trump card. He mastered his opponent's art, transforming admiration into a deadly weapon. Within a few hours, the Carthaginian army was annihilated. Over 20,000 warriors met their death on the battlefield, and 15,000 were taken prisoner, an undisputed confirmation of the Roman triumph. Carthage, broken and defeated, was forced to accept peace terms full of humiliation and bitterness. It had to relinquish its mighty fleet, vast colonies, and any claims to imperial grandeur. Hannibal, suffering his first crushing defeat, was forced to bury his dream of creating a great Carthaginian empire. Rome, jubilant and triumphant, became the sole master of the Mediterranean, and Scipio, its national hero, steeped in glory and honor. However, as often happens in Rome, triumph proved fleeting. Even the greatest minds and heroes are not immune to the envy and intrigues inherent in circles of power. The image of that battle is etched in the memory of generations. 80 African elephants, like enraged titans, charging the Roman legions, raising clouds of dust and emitting a deafening roar, like thunder from the heavens. This was Hannibal's last, desperate move, his most formidable and impressive weapon. Each of these giants could crush an entire unit of warriors with a single step. They were living, moving mountains, bristling with tusks, crowned with towers, and driven by an insatiable hatred for the enemy. The warriors' eyes were full of terror and hatred as they watched the approaching armada of elephants. However, Scipio, a battle-hardened leader, did not allow fear to paralyze his will. He had long understood that victory is forged not just by steel, but by strategic thinking. Scipio was acutely aware that, despite their impressive strength, elephants were susceptible to panic. He devised a daring plan designed to turn their might against them. On his command, the legionaries polished their armor to a brilliant gleam, turning it into a mirror-like surface that reflected the blinding rays of the African sun. At the opportune moment, military musicians were to deafen the battlefield with a cacophony of trumpets and horns. The objective was not to withstand the elephant's charge, but to disrupt it before it even began. As the giants surged forward, the Roman soldiers did not engage in direct confrontation. Instead, they parted like a curtain, forming corridors that allowed the animals to break through their lines unhindered. Disoriented by the bright flashes, the thunderous noise, and the lack of immediate targets, the elephants lost formation and panicked. Some turned back, trampling the ranks of their own troops, sowing chaos and destruction within the Carthaginian army. It was then that the Romans launched a devastating counterattack. From the flanks, Roman spearmen closed ranks and fell upon the enemy with deadly precision. Dozens of elephants succumbed to a hail of spears. Of the 80 giants, only 11 survived this carnage. The rest lay strewn across the battlefield, silent monuments to a bygone era. The twilight of an era was marked not merely by another military victory, but by a true triumph of strategic genius, composure, and the skillful use of terrain. Scipio prevailed not through numerical superiority, but through his ability to transform fear into an effective strategy. The Romans realized that even the most formidable adversaries could be defeated with a well-conceived approach. Scipio Africanus forever etched his name into history not only as an outstanding military commander, but also as a brilliant tactician. However, the Roman Republic was not always kind to those who rose above others, and Scipio Africanus, whose victories saved the Republic, whose tactical genius crushed Carthage, whose name echoed across the Mediterranean, became an unacceptable figure to many in the Senate. Scipio's enemies, who had not vanished after the war's conclusion, bided their time, awaiting the opportune moment for his downfall. Cato the Elder, a tireless champion of traditional republican values, spearheaded this campaign, wielding public condemnation instead of a sword. Scipio's brother, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, was accused of unlawfully appropriating war spoils after his triumph over Antiochus III in Asia. Scipio, outraged by such a dishonor befalling his family, responded with defiance, destroying the campaign's financial records right in the Roman Forum, before an astonished public. Scipio Africanus's triumphant return to Rome after his decisive victory over Hannibal at Zama unexpectedly escalated into a political conflict. During one Senate session, as terms for peace with Carthage were being debated, Scipio, unable to tolerate the delays and intrigues, defiantly tore up the peace agreements before the astonished senators. This audacious act sparked a wave of public jubilation, but simultaneously sealed his political fate. In conservative Rome, insubordination to the Senate, which embodied authority and tradition, was considered an unforgivable transgression. This act of defiance, though driven by good intentions, was interpreted by many as a manifestation of excessive pride. Soon, the Scipios found themselves embroiled in political intrigues, legal persecutions, and humiliating investigations. Lucius, Scipio's brother, was condemned, and Scipio himself was summoned to the Senate to give testimony on the anniversary of his greatest victory at Zama. However, Scipio ignored the summons. Instead of appearing before the court, he chose to withdraw and offer sacrifices to the gods, thanking them for the victory bestowed upon him that had changed the course of history. This move was perceived as an open challenge to the Senate, the final straw that broke his detractors' patience. The Senate decided to confiscate the disgraced general's property. Scipio found himself politically isolated, stripped of everything except his undying glory and sense of self-worth. In response, Scipio opted for voluntary exile. "I exile myself, so as not to be a burden to Rome, if my glory and greatness have become excessive," he declared, before leaving Rome forever to retire to his villa in Liternum. Far from the hustle and bustle of the capital, the gossip, and the ungrateful Roman populace, Scipio Africanus spent his final years at his estate in Liternum, engaging in literary pursuits, agricultural concerns, and reflections on the past. For even the most distinguished hero is destined to fall not by an enemy's blade, but by the malice of those who hypocritically swore to defend the very homeland he saved from imminent destruction. Scipio Africanus was more than just a talented military commander. He revolutionized the very understanding of war, leadership, and power within the Roman Republic. His legacy, despite the bitterness of exile and undeserved oblivion, profoundly influenced subsequent generations, extending far beyond the realm of military battles. From a young age, Scipio understood that war was not merely about brute physical strength. He skillfully employed intellect, psychological tactics, and theatrical flair as weapons, just as effective as a sword. He introduced innovative tactical solutions, prioritizing mobility over rigidity, cunning over brute force, and strategic foresight over situational reaction. At the Battle of Zama, for instance, he vividly demonstrated that even the seemingly invincible Hannibal could be defeated not so much by superior numbers, but by a profound understanding of the enemy's psychology. In the political sphere, Scipio embodied the eternal conflict between charismatic reformers and a conservative system. He earned the genuine admiration of the common people but simultaneously aroused apprehension among the senators, not because he sought tyranny, but because he represented the image of a future, a bolder, more imperial Rome, less dependent on the influence of old aristocratic families. His name became a symbol for countless families, and his deeds served as a guide for future generations. Eminent figures such as Julius Caesar, Pompey, and even Napoleon studied his biography with profound respect, for Scipio did not merely achieve victories on the battlefield. He instilled in his soldiers the belief that any obstacle could be overcome. He taught them that triumph in war begins with strengthening the spirit, and only then manifests on the field of battle. However, Scipio paid a heavy price for his greatness. His military achievements were undeniable, but his political legacy was divisive. Some saw him as a loyal savior, others as a leader who too boldly challenged the established system that had elevated him. But time, as an impartial arbiter, elevated him above all his detractors. In the annals of Roman history, Publius Cornelius Scipio stands not merely as a consul or a general, but as the man who halted Carthage, shifted the balance of power, and even in his political defeat, left an indelible mark. Exiled but not broken, Rome's savior left the city not with bitterness, but with his head held high. Scipio Africanus found refuge at his villa in Liternum, away from political intrigues, public gossip, and the city that had once exalted him as a hero. Scipio Africanus ended his life far from the capital's bustle, choosing a quiet retreat away from Rome as his place of voluntary confinement. Surrounded by picturesque landscapes, the celebrated general dedicated himself to rural life, indulging in philosophical reflections on the vicissitudes of his turbulent destiny. Away from political intrigues and state affairs, he delved into writing memoirs, tilled the land, and pondered the transits of glory and the ephemeral nature of power. Despite his enforced seclusion, Scipio remained devoted to Rome until his dying day, though he refused to return within its physical bounds. In a fit of pride and disappointment, he bequeathed instructions to be buried outside the city, which, in his view, had shown ingratitude for his services. Legend has it that his last words were, "Ungrateful homeland, you shall not have my bones!" And his will was fulfilled. On December 3, 183 BC, Scipio Africanus died at the age of 52. Ironically, in the same year, in another corner of the Mediterranean, his longtime adversary, the great Hannibal Barca, also passed away. It seemed fate itself had decided to simultaneously draw close to the stories of two outstanding commanders, whose rivalry had determined the outcome of the Second Punic War. Scipio was buried in Liternum, and above his grave stood a modest tombstone, which continues to spark intense debate among archaeologists and historians striving to unravel all the mysteries surrounding the life and deeds of this remarkable Roman figure. The passing of Scipio Africanus is shrouded in a veil of mystery and speculation, which only adds to the tragedy of his already challenging fate. The circumstances of his death continue to be debated among historians, yet one thing remains certain: oblivion did not become the destiny of this outstanding general. Though his mortal remains never returned to Rome, his deeds, his legacy, and his name are forever inscribed in the annals of history. Scipio did not vanish into oblivion. He departed life maintaining fidelity to himself and his principles. Rome did not determine his fate. He himself brought his biography to a close, demonstrating the same unyielding will with which he once took up arms, swearing an oath of eternal loyalty to the Republic. The life of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus serves as vivid proof of an undeniable truth: geniuses, and titans of spirit often do not fit within the confines of the very institutions they strengthened. Scipio crushed enemies who seemed invincible, pulled his homeland from the abyss of despair, revolutionized the art of war, and elevated Rome's prestige to unprecedented heights. However, when his influence became displeasing to those in power, he was ruthlessly removed from affairs. The very Rome he saved at the cost of his own life later accused him, persecuted him, and allowed him to die far from his native forum. Thus, the Republic revealed its true nature, ungrateful, vulnerable, and trembling before another's glory. It feared that Scipio's greatness would overshadow its own achievements, that his personality was too grand for its pompous columns and strict laws. Yet, time relentlessly restores the truth. Today, centuries later, virtually no one remembers the names of the senators who signed his condemnation. But the name of Africanus, the brilliant strategist who triumphed over Hannibal himself, the man who transformed every battle into a model of tactical mastery and valor, the citizen who chose exile over a compromise of conscience, is known to all. Scipio exemplifies the paradoxical situation that only true titans of spirit find themselves in, to be adored by the people and simultaneously feared by those in power, to achieve brilliant victories yet suffer defeat, to win wars but lose in political intrigues. And yet, his shadow has not faded into the mists of time. It lives on in every legend extolling courage, in every military doctrine prioritizing intellect over brute force, and in every memory asserting that true greatness needs no attributes of power or monuments, but merely the impartial assessment of posterity. Scipio Africanus was not merely an outstanding military commander. He was the embodiment of what a person can achieve when combining firm conviction, a sharp mind, and fearlessness. His life serves as a reminder that even the most valiant heroes can be betrayed by the very homeland they swore to protect. But it also teaches us that true glory rests not on titles and the fleeting appraisals of contemporaries, but on the indelible mark a person leaves in the annals of history. For a people who forget the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat tragic mistakes.